Howdy, howdy, everybody. Welcome to Office Hours FM episode 96, where I've got the Phillip Morgan on the show today to discuss positioning your business. Before we get down to the nitty gritty and all of our good talking, I'd first like to say hello to you guys that are listening live. If you would like to submit questions on Twitter, you can do that with the hashtag OfficeFM. Or if you are watching this over on Google and would like to use the Google Q&A app, you can do that. This part kind of feels like I'm doing the, and now you can fasten your seatbelts and should a water event occur, here's where your mask will fall.
That's right.
I would also love to thank my sponsors for today. We've got Gravity Flow, which I've told you a lot in the past about. It's email-based processes, but it's actually fantastic for any sort of internal, like if you're doing contract review, you need to get feedback on something, maybe something needs to be modified, or the checkbox approval. All those workflows are awesome. I don't know, Philip, did you ever work in an office where you had inter-office envelopes?
Yes, I did. I had a job for the U.S. Job Corps for like 10 months one time, and we had a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so you take it out, you sign it or whatever, you put it back in, and you pass it along to the next person on the list. So imagine that replaced by Gravity Flow, and that's the way that works. If you want to check it out, head over to cdills.me/Gravity Flow plugin. So even if it's not right for your business, it might be something, a really cool offering you could do for your clients. And then we've also got Pantheon. Welcome to the party as a first-time Office Hours FM sponsor. So these guys are web hosts, but their big focus is on scalability and infrastructure for large sites. Earlier this year, they put out a really cool resource called WordPress at Scale. And it's just a community resource. It's open source, so you can even contribute to it if you want to. Just sharing kind of some tips and tricks for using WordPress on larger sites. Today, they are offering Office Hours listeners a go at a free webinar talking specifically about WordPress and site speed. You can head over to cdills.me/high-speed sites to check them out. All right, so with that said, Philip, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here, Carrie. Thanks so much for having me.
I was so excited when you responded to my email. You're one of these guys I've heard on podcasts now for a couple of years, and you're like, I mean, not to throw you on a pedestal. You may not want to be there, but in fact, you are on my pedestal. So it is an honor to have you on.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I already kind of sit on a pedestal here at the house. So being on a second pedestal on top of this pedestal is even better.
It might not be ergonomic to sit on both pedestals.
Yeah.
So I'll leave you to figure that out. So tell me a little bit of your story. We know you've worked somewhere with interoffice mail, but for listeners who haven't listened to you on a million podcasts yet, give the little introduction. Who is Phillip Morgan? Where do you come from, and what do you do?
Well, hi everybody. I'm Phillip Morgan. I help custom software development shops get more leads, and I have a particular approach for doing that. It involves never forcing you, but encouraging you to narrow down who you focus on, what you do for them. So basically creating a very narrow market position for your business, using evergreen content marketing to attract leads, and using email marketing to keep in touch with them and demonstrate your expertise over time, so that when that fateful moment comes and they're like, I need fill in the blank, your name comes to the top of the list. I got into this because I had a background in technology. Like during the first .com boom in the 90s, I found gainful employment straight out of college. Sorry, all you millennials who are listening and having a different experience of it, but it was a good time for a college graduate back then to get an entry-level job doing what I was doing, which was training people to use computer software. And from there, I got into being a system administrator on Windows NT Server and Windows 2000 to kind of date myself just a little bit. And then I got into marketing and doing like technical marketing, writing white papers for Microsoft and case studies and that kind of thing. And that led me to where I am today. So like a lot of people in 2008, I was given, I was politely excused from having a job. I got laid off, in other words, and just decided to try working for myself and found it way more difficult than I thought it would be. Like, it's funny because I look back on that, Carrie, and I'm like, oh, running a business, you just get some clients and, you take good care of them and, it's just easy. And it turned out to not be easy. The marketing part of it was the hard part for me. Sales was sort of secondarily difficult. And a lot of those difficulties vanished not overnight, but very quickly when I narrowed down my own focus. So, that might be interesting to talk about, but briefly, that's how I got to where I am today. I live in California. I work with clients remotely all over the world. Actually, have a client in South America, and I've had clients in Europe, and mostly focus these days on trying to help custom software developers get more leads and make their business sustainable so that it's something they can retire on rather than just something they do when, the job thing is not working out.
Well, that great intro. And that actually brings up several questions. The first of which, your favorite Microsoft OS from back in the day. Which one was it?
I will be sort of a broken record and sound like a lot of people. I feel like Microsoft as a company always they had like their off year, or not year, but their off release in terms of an operating system release, and then like the release where they really nailed it. And it was usually an alternating thing. So, Windows, honestly, and like Windows XP was sort of like the peer of Windows NT, right? And well, not really the peer, but I always felt like Windows XP and Windows NT4 were some of the more solid operating systems that I worked with before I sort of got out of doing that.
I always like to ask that question of folks that have been around long enough to work on some of those legacy OSs, I guess we can call them now.
And this is irrelevant, but I used to need Windows software for a variety of reasons, and now I'm on a Mac, but I would always choose Windows XP to run in a virtual machine because it was like, lean and mean and stable compared to a lot of other options that I could have put in a virtual machine.
I'm a secret lover of XP myself.
All right. XP lovers unite.
It holds some golden promise of a bygone era. So when you set about to go freelancing, I think it sounds like you had a misconception that's quite common, which is, it's easy. Hang up your shingle.
Yeah, right.
Get some clients, you make some sites, they pay you some money.
Right.
So when you started, you said that you kind of struggled in those early days. What was your biggest kind of hurdle to overcome?
At the time, I thought it was things like scaling and getting more people working on projects and getting bigger projects. That's, I think, at the time what I thought the issue was. And in retrospect, I realized that the issue was I had no repeatable system for getting new clients. I mean, I know that's kind of a mouthful, but that's really, I think, what the problem was. There's this saying that, sales cures a multitude of ills. And what that means is that if you have, a steady stream of customers or clients coming to you, then you have the foundation that you need that you can build whatever you want on top of. But if you don't have that, then you don't really have a business, first of all. And that was really the core problem, that I just had no repeatable, reliable way for potential clients to find out about me, for them to understand how I could provide value, and for that to turn into a new client. that was really the problem. And you know, there was other stuff like I quickly was like, oh, here's how you scale up a $90 an hour business. You bring in people at, you know, $30 an hour, and you get bigger projects, and you just get more work coming through the door. And found that that doesn't work if you're not good at managing those $30 an hour subcontractors. Things can go sideways very quickly.
No doubt.
Yeah.
Wow, I just had a question on the tip of my tongue that fell out, so I'll have to circle back around to that one. But you mentioned the importance of finding a niche, so narrowing it down to the clients that you can best serve, which is fantastic advice and something I've had multiple guests talk about. I love that. But I'm curious how you niched down or found that niche that's now ultimately people like me are your niche, it sounds like.
It was definitely a process, and I don't I've become so enthusiastic about this idea, and I've seen it work so reliably to improve people's situation that now that's part of what I do, is help people with their own process of choosing a narrow focus. And it's always a process, is the first thing I want to say. So it's not like, you know, you can change a logo on your website in 5 minutes. It's not like that. It takes more time than that. It takes more effort. It takes a bit of soul searching and research, and dealing with your own sort of emotional resistance to the idea. It requires all of that. So I'm not trying to say, well, it's hard, don't worry about it, don't do it. But I also don't want people to have an unrealistic idea of what's involved. So to give you some context, when I started working for myself, I had some previous experience writing marketing copy for Microsoft. So that was kind of how I made that transition from being a systems engineer for Microsoft software to doing marketing. Was I had this technical background in Microsoft's product line, and so I was able to get a job doing marketing content creation around Microsoft products. And so I thought of myself as a writer, right? I thought of myself as, the thing that I do is I write. That's my core skill. You know, maybe I might kind of mix that up and say I'm a technical writer or I'm a marketing writer or whatever, but writer was always in there. And so this is not going to be a strict, like, linear timeline from then to now. But one of the things that I realized much later was writing is an input. It's like, it's an input to a process. So just like if you want to drive someplace in your car, and you have a car that runs on gasoline, like most of us do, or mine runs on diesel, but you know what I mean, runs on some kind of, you know, petro fuel, hydrocarbon based fuel. You have to put gas in the tank for your car to get you where you want to go. And there's other things that have to come together to make that happen. And the gasoline in the tank is like an input, right? It's something that goes in, and the result is you get to your destination, or you get where you're wanting to go. And I was really thinking of what I did in terms of the input, not really the result, because, well, actually the because there is very important, because I perceived there to be a great deal of job security in being flexible, adaptable, and something that a client from 500 different potential industries could hire me. Like, who doesn't need a writer at some point, right? If you're doing any kind of marketing that involves the written word, you know, theoretically you need a writer at some point. But one of the things I misunderstood is about how value is created, and I think we can touch on that later. Anyway, so I described myself as a writer. I realized later that was an input to a process, and what that did was it commoditized my services. It made me a commodity, just like gasoline is a commodity, just like soy milk is a commodity, where soy milk's not a great example. Gasoline is a great example. Do you want special gasoline for your car, or do you just want gasoline that doesn't mess up the motor and is cheap? If you're like me, you want the latter. You're not like after some kind of boutique gasoline, right? And so that's an example of how commodities work. And I think it would be interesting to talk for a little bit, if you want, about how commoditization works in the services world, because I'm talking about, the world of products, which is a very simple way to begin grasping the concept. I was describing myself as a commodity, and what I found is it was very difficult to get my rates above $90 an hour. I got substantial pushback even at that point. And in some parts of the world, and even in some parts of the United States of America, $90 an hour is a great rate. So I'm not dissing making $90 an hour or whatever your rate to the folks at home is. But in other parts of the United States, especially if you're working your butt off, you can probably bill a client 20, maybe 30 hours a week on average over the whole year, if you're lucky and really working hard. Doesn't go as far as you might like. It doesn't really, in my mind, it's not what most people are capable of. Most people are capable of a much better rate if they learn how to market themselves correctly. So I hit a rate ceiling. I got pushback even at that rate and ended up working for 60, $70 an hour a lot of times. And I felt like, and I don't think I was wrong about this, I felt like I had to say yes to every client that came my way, even if I knew they were going to be a crappy client. And I always knew if they were going to be a crappy client, and just sometimes had to swallow my pride and say yes anyway, because I needed the money. So anyway, that's where I was. And the first sort of glimmer of insight that I had that maybe that wasn't going to work for me was starting to think in terms of what results does writing create for clients? Does it, contribute to, the business making more money? Well, maybe I should start talking about that if it does. And in many cases it can, if you do it right. Or does it contribute to them, acquiring more customers or selling more of this particular product? So I started to see that there was a different way to frame what I did. And I didn't really have to change what I did very much, but I needed to change how I talked about what I did. In other words, I needed to change my marketing. I feel like I've been talking for a long time.
No, that's so much great information. If I had a pencil, it would have already been on fire and burnt up and showed smoke on the screen. Jackie asked a great question that plays into this conversation. She said, how did you discover your unique value proposition? And it kind of sounds like you already had it, but it was the ability to reframe that as the results, not the process. I don't know, what's your...
So how I did that is one way. There's several ways how, someone could do that. So here's how I did it. I talked to people. There you go. I talked to people. I talked to people talked to some clients, and, basically got them to say, so, like, what do you not have enough of? And, what are the kind of business problems that you have? What do you wish you had more of? What keeps you up at night? What's troubling you? And one of the things that I heard more than once is, I need more leads. I need more. Yes, content marketing is on my mind, but needing more leads is what keeps me up at night. That's really the much bigger problem. That really gets my attention. And I thought, well, writing can create content marketing. Content marketing can create leads. So why don't I just, I'm sort of simplifying the process, but it was like, why don't I just talk about getting more leads? Why don't I make that be the focus of the conversation I have with people? And then if my services can truly help them, then, maybe we'll have a deal. Maybe they'll become a client. So that was sort of how I did it, was talking to existing clients. I help people with this in a mentoring program I have. So what I recommend, it sort of depends on where they are. So I have some people who are like just kind of brand new to freelancing and they want to start out on the best foot they can. I make them have conversations with strangers. It's so scary and so valuable. So I say, okay, let's catalog, what you're interested in, maybe what you have some skills in, and let's try to figure out a couple potential market verticals where those skills might have some value. And I want you to go talk to people about their business. And this blows everybody's mind. Like, first of all, cold calling or cold emailing strikes fear into the heart of everybody I know. And what's surprising is that if you can convince someone that you might be able to help them and you do not have anything to sell, and they are in some kind of pain, not like, they just stubbed their toe, but some kind of business pain, they will talk your ear off about their business pain, and you will learn how to market your services. It's almost that simple. I mean, it basically is that simple. So I sort of send people out into the world to get what are called customer development interviews, short 15, 20-minute calls with strangers to find out about their problems. And on average, about 10% of the people that you cold email, they've never heard of you, you have no credibility with them, will agree to get on the phone with you and tell you about some problem they have. It's a marvelous tool for developing a value proposition, because a value proposition is just simply where your skills and their pain overlap. That's really your value proposition as a freelancer or as a consultant or small services business. So I do that. If they already have a base of experience, which is sort of a different situation, I'll kind of recommend the approach I took, which is, okay, why don't you talk to your existing clients and let's find out how to sort of fine tune your marketing message. So, without spending a whole hour talking about just that, which you can tell I could, that's sort of how I approach that. It's a process of discovery of what's out there. It's also partially a process of discovery of what's inside you. What are you passionate about? What clients would you never want to work with again, even if, the world was, even if they were the last client on the world, which ones would you never want to work with again? So we kind of narrow down all the possibilities to where you have some overlap, their needs, your skills, your enthusiasm. That's a pretty good value proposition, at least to start out with. And what that tends to result in is that you narrow down, and you're not saying yes to every kind of client that approaches you. You're focused on maybe a particular problem. Like an example I love using is in the WordPress world is membership sites. There are these businesses that use WordPress and then some membership plugin software to basically build a business on top of WordPress that distributes information, and their customers pay a monthly fee, right? That's an example of focusing on a problem. Those kind of businesses have a particular type of problem that is specific to them. Churn, how do we get more members? How do we retain existing members? And then, from the technical side of things, how do we make WordPress, make this sort of business experience seamless and fluid and so forth? So that's one way to narrow your focus. Another is to narrow down to a market vertical. So, websites for, high-end nail salons. I saw a great example the other day in the world of services, not in specifically the technical world, but there's a guy in Portland, Oregon who sells houses he specializes in houses that have big garages for people who have like a big car collection. So imagine you're wealthy. Imagine one of the ways you enjoy using that wealth is to, say you have 6 different classic cars. So if you're going to buy a house and you want your cars there at the house with you, you need a house with a giant garage. This is a real estate agent who specializes in selling that kind of house.
Now that is a definite niche.
Yep.
You said, and this is maybe the quote of the episode, there might be more, but your value proposition is where your skills overlap their pain. And that's, I think people try to make it, or I try to make it overly complex.
I try to make it simple because it's hard enough. It's hard enough as it is, because there's all this emotional stuff that comes up. Like most freelancers are not good at saying no. Either, like me, you kind of used to be a people pleaser. You're sort of getting over that, or it's just terrifying because you're like, wow, if I say no to this opportunity, that might be the last one that ever shows up. and you're just afraid to say no for survival reasons. And so anyway, it's hard enough as it is to narrow down. So I do try to make it easy, at least on the conceptual level. Their pain is, as a business, is stuff they'll pay good money to solve, right? If they don't have enough clients, they will pay to acquire more. If they're, or they should. Or if, if their current website is costing them clients, they'll pay to replace it with a better one. They have to be aware of this stuff. They have to know that the pain is there. They have to be aware of it. But if they are, then any place your skills overlap that pain and you can make it better, think about that as your value proposition. That's a good place to start, at least.
So of course, in the broader scheme of positioning, your value proposition plays a large role in that.
I almost think of them as the same thing. It's like, so your market position is that place in the market where you can deliver the most value to clients, right? Which really, it's almost becomes a semantic difference to say, well, what's the difference between a market position and a value proposition? To me, they're almost the same. They may as well be the same thing. So just again, to further simplify things for people, your market position is that you're trying to find that overlap where your skills deliver the most possible value for a client. Here's the interesting thing about that. When you start looking at it that way, you think, okay, I used to talk about myself in terms of my skill set, and those are inputs to a process. Now I'm starting to think about things in terms of what creates value for my clients, which is good. That's maybe business 201. Like business 101 is just being able to deliver a project for a client without screwing it up and get paid successfully and do that a couple times, right? So maybe business 201 is starting to think, oh, okay, so what creates more value for a client, and do my skills and allow me to do that for them, because that's where I want to go if I want to get, better rates or more demand for my services. So when you make that mindset shift, it's incredible, because to me that sort of deals with half of the problem there is with marketing, which is thinking about things from your own perspective rather than thinking about them from the client's perspective. As soon as you do that, content marketing becomes a lot easier. Reaching clients with an attractive offer becomes much easier. It just, a lot of things become easier. They still take work, but the struggle goes out of it, I think.
That kind of reminds me, I just started reading Start With Why. Man, I can't remember the author's name.
Simon Sinek's book. Okay, I saw the TED Talk. I haven't read the book, but yeah, that was a super memorable TED Talk.
But yeah, so same basic deal. You start out with your why. Why is it that you're doing whatever it is you're doing? And people identify with the why much more than they do whatever technically it is that you do.
I love that question, why? Because it's useful there. It's useful in thinking about value proposition and market position and so forth. It's also useful during the process of talking to a client who maybe wants to hire you, just to ask about everything, all their assumptions. Why? So why do you want to build this on WordPress instead of Squarespace? Or, why do you think you need a new website? Why not just keep the old website? Why do you think the website needs to look this way? Why not keep the old one? All those why questions are so valuable. They're another one of that sort of things that I think levels people up when they really embrace it. Just to be like the annoying, at what age do kids start asking why? Be like that 2, kid.
3.
Okay,
why?
Yeah. Be like the 3-year-old. Why? Why do you want to do this? Why do you do it that way?
It's actually, I think, a differentiator, going back to commoditization. For, there's a million people out there that can build you a website because they just take you saying, I need a website, and then they just go execute on, I need a website, as opposed to asking the questions why and getting clients to actually, or potential clients to actually think through what ultimately the need is. And a lot of times it's different from what they thought they originally needed.
And sometimes the best outcome of that type of conversation is the client says, gosh, I guess we don't need to do this. Thanks. And you're not working with them, and you have actually created an amazing amount of trust, and really your reputation is boosted by doing that. Whereas, building them the thing they thought they needed but really didn't, and then it, doesn't really produce any good results for them, it is more damaging to your reputation long term. So sometimes you may not like the answer you get if you really dig in with the why questions, but it can be the best thing for your business long term.
We've got some folks on Twitter concurring, Amber and Paul concurring that Start With Why is a great book. So yeah. I'll throw a link to that in the show notes.
Cool.
Okay, man, okay. Let's talk a little bit about pricing and how you go about setting your pricing structure. So you mentioned earlier that you had $90 an hour, and there's a sort of arbitrary cap because you can only work X number of hours, and so how, I guess it's a two-parter question. One, how do you go about determining what that value is to set your pricing? And we'll answer that one first, and then we'll roll.
So I've experimented with a number of different models. So I've experimented with you can buy my time on the hourly or fractions of an hour or whatever, and here's the price per hour. And I have experimented with fixed price pricing, where it's a project with a defined scope, and here's the price for the project. I've experimented with that same idea, but with price tiers. So, we could do 2 or 3 different things, each with increasing value and each with an increasing price. What do you want to do? Make the choice between those, that sort of choice of yeses, as Alan Weiss says. I've experimented with modified hourly pricing, where I have a week rate, which is actually what I'm currently doing. And I'll explain why I'm doing it that way. It's a little bit, to be honest, it's a little bit of laziness. And I have experimented with subscription pricing with a defined scope. So for a while, I had a service called My Content Sherpa, which was using that pricing model, where you would pay a monthly fee, and then each month you would get a certain amount of stuff. In this case, it was content marketing, but I see other people, doing other things with that pricing structure. Like my friend Nick DeSabato delivering A/B testing at a fixed monthly subscription price. So those are all the things I've tried. Hourly, I hated. It kind of made me a terrible person. It made me look for ways to do less in the same amount of time, which I'm not proud to admit, but that was one of the incentives that's embedded in hourly pricing, is like, wow, the less efficient I am, the more I get paid. But yet that's kind of where all of us start out, I think, or most of us start out, because it moves all the risk onto the client, which as new freelancers, we're sort of not really prone to say, yes, give me more risk. Being a freelancer and being self-employed, it already feels risky enough. So the subscription pricing was fine, but I have found that I'm not great at managing scope. So that was kind of difficult for me to manage, because that was a fairly low profit margin service that really depended on managing scope tightly and efficiency, and that's all fine. I've seen other people take that same model and just do amazingly well with it. So there's nothing wrong with that pricing model. Here's why I use weekly rates right now, is because I know about what I can get done in a week, which is to build just the sort of bare bones of a basic marketing funnel for a software development shop that has no marketing funnel. So I can do things like I can put together a lead magnet, some basic email marketing follow-up, a sort of outreach program that's designed to help them get people looking at their lead magnet. And, I can do all that in about a week. So I share the risk with my client instead of pushing all the risk onto them. So there's a fixed price for that week. And if I don't get done what we agree is reasonable, I either have to explain why not, and we both agree it's good, or I'll work a little extra to get it done. Maybe I'll work over the weekend another day to wrap it up or something like that. So I share the risk. They take on some risk, but the other thing is I work in week-long increments. So for stuff that takes longer than that, the client can quit at any time, rather than and we try in each week to wrap up whatever it is we're doing that week, so they at least have something that's finished and has value. And so rather than like getting 90% of the way through an hourly project, and then we have that dreadful phone call where I'm like, oh, I'm really sorry, guys, but some stuff happened. It looks like it's going to take another 30% of the original estimate to get this done. I never have to have that call, and I get paid up front. So every week I get paid up front before I start work, and I'm never chasing down invoices or like, hey, when are you guys going to pay this? So it works pretty well for me, but I just want to give some context to say it's not the only way to do pricing, and it's not the best way universally. It's just kind of what I've arrived at for now. And then, like I said, I have a mentoring program. So that's like a subscription monthly thing. That's another way. And I sell a book. So that is, yet another way that I make money. So anyway, go ahead.
Actually, yes, I've got a future episode dedicated all to alternate income streams. Actually, nice. That could probably span multiple episodes. But one thing you mentioned risks, sharing risks with the client. Can we dig into that a little bit more?
Totally.
Of what you mean by you assuming the risk versus the client assuming the risk, et cetera?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a couple forms of risk that show up in the work that I do, and I think the work that any freelancer does. There's sort of like a technical risk of like, we didn't know this was going to happen. This plugin, like in developer terms, it's like, oh, this plugin got updated since the last time I worked with it, and I didn't know, and we just can't do that, right? And so the thing that we were trying to do is impossible for reasons outside of our control. That's one risk, and that risk can be shared, or the freelancer can bear it completely. Like a way for the freelancer to bear that risk completely is to say, I'm going to refund your money. So let's say you got paid up front for the project or for the week of work or for the day of work or whatever. And you get into it enough to realize there's just no way it's going to happen. And that's really your fault as a freelancer. You didn't do your due diligence, and you didn't really check into that before you promised the result to the client. And you can say, look, I'm really sorry. Clearly my mistake. How about I refund your money? Or you could say, it's going to take a little longer, but I know it can work around it. I'll do it for the original price. Like that's the freelancer taking the risk. The freelancer not taking the risk would look like this. It would look like finding that out and then spending 10, 20 hours trying to fix it, and then telling the client, you know what? I just burned 20 hours trying to fix a problem. I didn't even include you in my awareness of that problem. Can you please pay me now for the 20 hours that I spent? Like that would be sort of moving the risk onto the client. So I think in many situations, it's possible to share the risk. There's always going to be unknown unknowns, like things you didn't know about that just came up and made things take longer. Sometimes things will go faster than you thought. So there's that sort of technical risk of the project not working out. I think the other big category of risk is, does it create the results that you wanted? And again, here's a way of making the client bear 100% of that risk, is knowing better than the client and not pushing back. So the client's like, I want to have a full motion video hero image on the screen. And you're like, oh, that's going to kill page load time. And you don't say anything. And for some reason that affects the success of the project, right? That is sort of making the client bear the consequences of their decisions, even though you knew better and you could have told them. So, the risk for achieving the results is something that can or cannot be shared. And I'm not saying the way to bear risk is always to refund money if things don't work out. There's other ways to do it, like breaking this project into smaller chunks is a good way to manage risk. So instead of like, yes, we're going to build this 50-page website all in one big project, is maybe to break it into smaller chunks to make the risks smaller or spread it out more. So, I mean, those are some things that occur to me. It's, I just want to say that, I started out trying to avoid any form of risk at all. And what I realized is that part of the path to justifying higher rates is to start to, progressively take on more risk so that you're sharing it with your client. So I don't want to come across as dogmatic about that, but I do think it's part of sort of progressing as a freelancer.
That makes total sense. Thank you for sharing that. And I apologize that my head ducked away for a second. I just managed to spill my water, and I wanted to make sure it wasn't landing on anything electrical.
Oh, I bet.
So we're safe.
Oh, good. No shock
emergency
hazard there.
So for folks that are tuning in late, I'm chatting with Phillip Morgan. If you want to ask him questions, you can do that on Twitter using the hashtag OfficeFM, or if you're over on the Google Pluses, you can use the Google Q&A app to do that. And also a big shout out to my sponsors today. We've got Gravity Flow, which is a great way to manage sort of the communication cycles. An example I was just thinking of would be if you had the ability, or your client had the ability to send in job applications on a site. You could use Gravity Flow to manage the different steps in that process. Like, oh, we need more information, send it back to the applicant. Oh, okay, it's approved by the hiring manager. Now it needs to be kick over to HR or whatnot. Very cool plugin. Go check that out at cdeals.me/Gravity Flow plugin. And then we've got Pantheon, a WordPress host. They also do some other hosting, but a WordPress host that's really focused on scalability and site speed. They're offering a free webinar to you guys, anyone that's listening to this show. And you can check that out over at cdeals.me/high-speed-sites. And with that, now back to our regularly scheduled program. All right. So if anybody's got, okay, Jackie has a question. We're talking still on value-based pricing. So where or why aren't you using that more? Is it because, like you said, it's just easier to do the weekly at this point in time, or?
That's a great question. So part of it is I experimented with value-based pricing in a sort of sloppy is not quite the right word. I experimented with it. I did not really give the experiment what I needed. And so I just, I submitted some 5-figure proposals and, some like $30,000, $40,000 proposals, and just got nowhere with that. And I felt like I lost an opportunity to help that client in a more gradual sort of way, because part of it was a mindset thing. I was like new to the idea of value pricing, and it seemed exciting, and it seemed like, wow, you can just make so much money this way. And so I sort of I instead of breaking the project down into smaller pieces like we were talking about under the heading of risk, I was like, well, let's get it all under one roof and have the justification from a value perspective for doing $30,000, $40,000 worth of work. And there's this idea that I hear more in the world of like internet marketing about how someone goes from being a stranger to spending a lot of money with you. And I think that happens even outside of the world of internet marketing, just in the world of services. It happens when there's enough trust to justify that higher price tag. Also, the clients I was submitting these proposals to were smaller. And so I think a, $30,000 worth of marketing services for a, Fortune 1000 company is like that. They do that all the time. Whereas a lot of these people who were getting that kind of a proposal from me, it's probably the first time they'd seen a proposal for that amount from any external service provider. And so it's kind of a big jump to go for them from like zero to, $30,000 paid up front, by the way, because I was asking for upfront payment. And so I think there was that. But I think that brings out some interesting issues, like where is that prospective client's level of trust in you? Is it high enough that you can promise a really valuable outcome? They believe you can do it and are willing to pay a fairly high price for that. It takes a lot of trust building to get there. And so why I backed away from that kind of pricing model is I started to believe that, at least for my business, that the sort of, in SaaS world, this would be the LTV, the lifetime value of a customer or client, is like how much money they've paid you for the entire time that they end up being a customer. And I think it's a really useful way to think about services, is like, am I going to try to get the entire lifetime value of this client on the first project? Or is it possible that we might work together over, a number of years, and maybe we're not doing something every month for that entire time. But if I look at their lifetime value, how can I make it easy for that to be a big number? And that's really the kind of thinking that led me to I'm certainly not the person who invented weekly pricing. I'm not claiming that, but it just led me to say that might work. That might help me sort of increase the lifetime value and have longer term relationships if we basically just spread it out over time. Now, granted, there are some projects that need to be done kind of more like a sprint than anything. And I think in those cases, value-based pricing is probably a good model to examine. But so it's really a combination of factors. I didn't give it enough of a try, and I just found something that seemed to be working better. And if you lose every project you bid on for 2 or 3 months, you kind of lose enthusiasm for that approach.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, thanks for sharing your thought process.
Totally.
Thought process on that. That's actually a great answer.
Yeah.
Going back to the risk subheading, Patricia asked, how would you advise new freelancers on risk, knowing what you know now?
Well, I advise everybody, on every topic, to not try to take on too much at once. I'm not far removed from the time in my freelance career when I was really struggling. And so the last thing I want to say to someone who's struggling is like, well, you're doing it all wrong. You need to change everything ASAP. And, oh, by the way, don't go bankrupt in the process. So, I definitely try to say, okay, think of this as a progression. Think of this as a 6-month or a 12-month project, and, try to break it down into smaller pieces. So I think that the first step, and this is going to sound maybe just microscopic, but the first step is start to discuss risk with your clients during the proposal. So again, as a brand new freelancer, that would have been sort of terrifying to me to say, this project's not necessarily a slam dunk. There's things that could go wrong, and we should talk about those things before we get going. And so I think that's enough of a chunk to bite off for a brand new freelancer. It's just the idea that you would discuss it and you'd be the one who brings it up, not your client, because if you're at all like I was, you're just afraid you're going to lose it, and you do everything you can to make that project happen. So start with discussing risk with your clients. That, I think, will lead into the next thing, which is to start to proactively try to mitigate risk. So once you're talking about the risk, the next step is, well, how can we make the risk smaller? You can't make it totally go away, because, that's not how life works, in my opinion, but you can make it smaller. So then you start to kind of collaborate with your client in a way that I bet is new, that maybe you, the brand new freelancer, has never tried before. So yeah, we could probably talk about that more, but I think those are two really concrete starting points for the brand new freelancer. Then, maybe you start calling it out in your proposals, and, from there, maybe you change how you price or do projects so that you're bearing a little bit of the risk and you've got more skin in the game. But that gets a little, again, I wouldn't want to recommend that on day one because that's super scary stuff.
No doubt. Well, thank you for that. So I'm going to ask you the softball of all questions. I'm just going to toss a softball at you. You ready?
I'm ready.
Can you tell me about Drip Sherpa?
Ow, I dropped it. No, I'm kidding. Drip Sherpa, I'll tell you, is another sort of experiment with productized consulting that, I'll always be sort of the full disclosure guy. So that's a service I'm going to be winding down. I think it might be interesting to talk about why. So I should look back and see when I first signed up with Drip. The website is getdrip.com. They're a very, I just think, incredible product because they provided a lot of the functionality of something like Infusionsoft for a fraction of the price. And when I got into email marketing, I was using MailChimp and I was like, well, this works, but I don't really love it. Hate the interface. And I was like, what else is out there? And everything that was like the next step up from MailChimp started at like $300 a month or more. And so I felt like, well, I can't justify that. I'm not going to get the return on investment, so I won't do it. And then Drip came along and was like this perfect sweet spot solution. So I got very excited about it, started using it. Seemed like I was learning more about it than any of my peers. And I was like, oh, I should do a service where I set up people's Drip accounts for them. And so that's dripsherpa.com, which you can, check out if you're interested. What I found was that that's an example of a market position that's based on a platform. And that is a position that I advise people to use very carefully. So when you base your services on some kind of platform, your sort of fortunes rise and fall with the platform. And I'm not saying that Drip's not doing well. They're doing extremely well. But what they started doing, which they should have been doing, no, that's the wrong way to say it, which was inevitable, is they kind of started to fill in some of the gaps that service was designed to fill, which was sort of an information gap about how to use Drip. And, so I guess the point, the sort of takeaway for people is not so much about Drip. It's more about like, if your market position is based on a service that's early, then you're kind of like hooking your fortunes to the fortunes of that service. And if you don't really know where it's going to go, that's worth taking into account. That's sort of a risk to your market position. And Drip Sherpa was always kind of odd because it was like basically trying to do something for people they should be able to do themselves, but some people couldn't. And I don't know. So here's the other takeaway. Having like 2 or more brands that you market yourself under is like double the work of just having one. Because then you're like maintaining multiple websites and creating content marketing for multiple websites. And that's just hard if you're kind of already busy and already focused. It's just hard to have more than one focus. So I kind of am like rolling that up under my other services, mostly to just avoid having to maintain 2 websites and 2 email lists and 2 of everything.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Wow, lots of good.
This is stuff other people would have said don't do, Philip, but I just had to do it myself because I'm sort of, boneheaded that way sometimes.
Oh, I was going to call you entrepreneurial, but
thanks. I appreciate that.
I think a lot of us are kind of boneheaded, but yeah, we'd like to try things out ourselves. So as we've got to wrap up the episode, unfortunately, because I think I could talk to you for hours about some of these things, but. So you have a podcast. Tell if you would share with my listeners a little bit about your podcast.
I do. I have a podcast called the Consulting Pipeline Podcast. If you go to Consulting Pipeline, is it podcast?
Okay, that's terrible marketing.
Yeah, I know. I love vanity domain names, but now I have so many of them that I kind of, they all run together. If you go to consultingpipelinepodcast.com, you will see the aforementioned podcast. Here's what's interesting about that podcast. It's sort of structured in seasons so that I can dump a lot of time and energy into it for a while and then, put it on hiatus for a while and get the next season ready. So I'm getting the second season ready. The first season is really about positioning. How can you find a good market position? How can you use that to build your pipeline of freelance or consulting work? And it's a pretty good show, I think. It's mostly an interview format interspersed with some sort of short audio essays. And I'm sort of experimenting with different formats for the second season. The second season is going to be about content marketing. So how do you use content marketing to help build your pipeline? That's really the topic. And I guess more specifically than that, what if you don't have a lot of time? What if you are busy? What if you're not even really a natural writer? What do you do then? Can you still use content marketing? Is it still effective? That's really the core focus of this next season. I'm experimenting with a sort of super, super short 15-minute format to make it easier to listen to, more digestible, still probably relying on interviews. So that's what's coming up, I hope, in the next couple months with that. But as it is, there's 20 or so episodes that I think have some great information if folks are interested in that.
Awesome. Well, if my listenership just plummets, I'll know that they have all migrated to
siphoned them off.
Consulting Pipeline podcast. Well, we will wrap up here. Phillip, if somebody wants to follow up with you to say hello or ask follow-up questions, where can they find you on the web?
This is going to shock you. There's only one way you can do it, which is getting on my list. So you can go to my website, and there's all kinds of ways to get on my list. Here's what I'd recommend is go to positioningcrashcourse.com, sign up for that email crash course. You'll learn something about positioning that we haven't covered here. You'll get something out of it. And if that's all you want, just unsubscribe and, have a wonderful day. But if you want to reply to an email that you get there and ask me more questions or what have you, I would really welcome that. I love interacting with people and trying to answer questions in the fairly narrow range where I feel like I have something to offer, and positioning is one of those. So that would be the thing, positioningcrashcourse.com.
Awesome. Well, a pleasure chatting with you today.
Likewise.
And
very much so.
For everyone who got to tune in live, I love you as always, and your questions. For those of you that are catching this after the fact, I appreciate you greatly as well. You can head over to officehours.fm and sign up for the news list or the newsletter if you're not already on that. I got some special things planned for episode 100, and you don't want to miss the info. And with that, I will say goodbye, and y'all have a great weekend.